Hey, so you probably found this video because you're looking to tweak some of the sounds on the Polyend tracker or wanting to use the Polyend tracker to create some weird and fantastic sounds. And we can download libraries for days, but it's just being able to tweak one or two little sounds. So what I thought is the Polyend tracker's got some really nice features, and using tracker workflow there's some really cool techniques that we can use. So I thought let's do a bit of a dive on the track that we've been working together and look at how we can improve the sound design through the sample engine on this machine. So if you haven't, definitely get my sample pack, chuck it on the machine, and we'll get straight into it. Now we're back with the Polyend tracker and we have our samples loaded, and we've got this pattern here, but we haven't really done anything to the samples. Like if we go to the sample editor, we're just using them verbatim what they are, but we do have instrument parameters that we can really have a fiddle with. Now if I just jump straight into the instrument parameter, we have a few things that we can work on. So we've got like access to volume, we can pan the sample left and right. Now if we bring that back, we have the tune, which is sort of like we can raise and lower it by semitones. So if I drop this down by 12, then we go back to 0. So it would be an octave jump, and then we can adjust the semitones, and then we got the fine pitch, which sort of lets us dial in a sound if it's sort of out of tune. Next on this lane, we do have access to a couple of filters here. So usually it's disabled, but if we throw on a low pass filter and our sample's quite bright, so we can actually bring down the high element, so it lets the low pass through. Then we have the high pass filters. So if we start playing with this one, it's at 100%. So it's only letting the high through, and then as we bring it down, it lets the whole lot through. And then we have a band pass, which is sort of like the high and the low pass working together, but it's only sampling a little section of the sound. So that whole thing shifts up and down. So if we start fiddling with this one, so it sweeps through the audio, which can have some really nice effects. And then alongside of each one of these, we have our resonance, which is sort of creating a feedback loop to really ramp up the sound. So if we start having a low pass filter, we'll make that about there. If we start raising the resonance, we can see it's amping up a very select section. So this is really cool to fiddle with. I'm just going to reset that back to where it was. And then if we hit instrument parameters again, it comes to the second menu where we have a lot more in-depth look at some of the samples. Now, each one of these elements we can actually affect by an envelope or an LFO. And if you haven't been around synthesizers, for one, an envelope is a way of controlling a audio by ramping up, and it ramps down, they're sort of flat lines, and it comes back down. So if we hook them up, so we've got the attack, so that's that first part here. So if we start increasing the attack, and if we lower it down, see how it's like really instant. So it's sort of like straight up to the mass volume and comes back down. If we add some delay to it, which I need to knock out the sustain and release, we have nothing at the moment, but if I start, so the longer that is, the longer that tail is going to come back down. But between these two, it sort of goes up to the maximum volume that it can hit. And then if we start bringing sustain back in, so this is sort of how much it drops down to before it hits that flat area. So if we've got it at 50%, and then if we drop it down, so it sort of lets that ramp down. And then the release is when we take the note off, like right now. If I release, it's pretty much instant, but we can sort of adds extra. So with those elements, we can actually create some really cool ways that we can bring the sound in. If we want to make some flute sounds, we can start raising the attack, but this is one way we can meddle with the sound. And the last thing I forgot to mention is the amount. So how much this amplifies the amount. So right now this tells it goes to the full volume to no volume, but if I drop that down to, we can sort of use that to control the element as well, so how much it's going to affect the other part is LFOs. Now, an LFO, think of it as an oscillator. So we have a signal that's happening. So we've got a few here that we can pick from. If we just go with a triangle wave, it all goes like this shape. So it goes up to 100%, then comes back down. How often that happens is by the amount. So we've got our speed here. If I set that to 4 steps, so every 4 step, it's going to go up and then back down again. And then we'll keep cycling. So if we listen to that, and then if we speed it up, and then we can slow it down. So with these elements, like we've got a few different saw waves. So we'll go with saw, which pretty much goes straight up and then slowly tapers off. Reverse saw. So it creates like a plucky element because it's jumping straight up and then fading off. We have a square wave, which is just going to be like on and off. And if we speed that up, cool little tremolo effect. And then random just picks a random voltage every time that step happens. So if we play that, it may look limiting that we only have an envelope and an LFO, but with the amount of options that we can fiddle with these elements, as well as having the tracker effects sitting there as well, we can get really complex with our sound design. So I'm just going to set this back to envelope because we want to keep that sound. And then similar to the first panel, we can sort of affect some of these elements here. So we've got the cutoff, we've got the panning, we've got the volume. So we can say if I wanted to have this pan left and right when I'm playing my tune, I can go to panning, add the LFO, set it to triangle, probably make it a bit shorter. We can set it 16 steps, and if we keep it at 15. And then it creates that pan between left and right, which gives it a nice little stereo effect. So having a few elements in here, if we're working on wavetables or granular, we can do some work, as well as we can detune the sound as well. So if we put a low pass on that, so every time it hits, it'll be a little bit out of tune, but we'll keep that off. Now let's have a bit of a chat about some of the effects that we can do on the machine. So if we go in here, we have overdrive, which is sort of like a distortion that we can use on our sound. Bit loud, but we can sort of curve that off with the volume. We have the bit depth, so we have the full 16 bits, that's how the sound was recorded, but we can sort of destroy the sound. Add a bit of that hiss, and really bit depth is sort of like when we convert a analog signal to digital, we turn it from ones and zeros, so it gives us quite a limited range. So if we were to draw like a sine wave, to actually get the nice perfect circles, if we give it more bit depth, it will look more like an actual curve. But if we reduce the bit rate to 4, which is 16 steps, so 1, 2, 4, 8, so it'd be 8. We have 8 sections between the maximum and the minimum to create that nice arc, so it actually look like this jagged line here, and that's how we're introducing all that hiss. The other two effects, which are send effects, so it's not like we put a reverb on the sound, we're sending the sound to a reverb, which we have a reverb and a delay, which live up in the master section here. If we go to the master first panel, and then we have reverb and delay here, which we can both edit the variables here. So we can sort of create some really nice effects with those. Now it's all in good deep diving into the actual elements of how we can make our sounds cooler. Let's actually start using a bit more practical sense. So we've got our pattern, and I'm just going to start from left to right. So I'm going to work on our drums first. Now if I mute everything, we can add I like adding a little bit of reverb to give it a bit of a room feel. So what I can do is we'll go to the first instrument parameter, and I'm just going to pick my kick. So if I preview, so I'm going to add a little bit of reverb to my kick, probably a bit much. And one thing that we can do here, which I learnt from the Polyend site, is instead of having just the kick sitting there by itself, we can actually bring in the high pass filter, which seems a bit odd at first, like not much sound there, but if we drive up the resonance and then start bringing this kick sound, we can get a really fat kick sound because we're using the resonance to make it feedback loop and really saturating that low end. So it's just a nice way to improve our drums. Now, same thing again, we can have a look at our snare, which I like to add a bit of reverb to as well. Probably not that much. About there. And we can keep going through our drum sounds. Like I like adding a bit to the reverb just to give it a bit more room. But what we can do with the hi-hat, which is this one, is I don't like a static center hi-hat. Like I like to keep the drum and snare sort of in the center. But we can use that instrument parameter and use the panning to add, just make sure I've got it selected, I'm just going to add an LFO. And we can sort of create, we can use triangles, see how that goes. If we hit play and make sure that we have the hi-hat. So you can hear it panning there. I like that one. Probably bring that down a bit. We could try other elements as well. But usually I like the hi-hat panning left and right. So if we bring in the drums as well. And we could add a little bit more rhythmic flavor by sending the hi-hats along the delay line, but I do like them how they're clean right here. And really this is a nice way to just give the drums a little bit more life to originally how we programmed them out, giving it variance in microtoning movements and volume. But there's one other element that we can do on a tracker or with the Polyend tracker, because we have that recording feature. Like when I started this tutorial series, I was talking about how to layer elements so we can have that hi-hat and drum when we're making our mono sounds. But we can also use that layering trick as a sound design element to layer a few different drums together. Like one thing I like doing is layering in those sort of 8-bit elements from the NES. Like I do like that PCM sound, but I can layer that in with the real drum. So what I can do is I'm just going to use this pattern here because I'm using these as the working files. And I'm just going to put that kick sound up the top. That is not my kick sound. And I am going to go fishing for my NES samples. So I'm going to go into, and I'm going to pick one of those PCM drum sounds. Cool. And I am going to sort of pick a new spot to work with. So I'll just add him there and then back into here. And I am going to add that instrument here. So we've got the kick and that little bit of a grit behind it. But what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to add a volume command on each one. And then with the Polyend tracker, I can quickly scroll between the two and create a mix. So I can blend the two together. Like I want more of that 8-bit sound. I can add other effects in here as well, start beefing up the sound. And then when I'm done and I feel like I really enjoy this sound, select it all. Actually, I might make this one short. So I'm only selecting the kick area that I'm working with. And then we go more, render selection, then we go render and load. And then it's put in that little space there. So that's why I left it free before. And we got that new drum sound sitting there. What I might do, instead of fiddling with the sound, I might just, we're going to copy, and then we hit paste, and we overwrite the previous drum sound. So if we go back to, we'll cancel, go back to pattern 1. So we got that nice flavor from the original kick, which is quite loud, and then we have that Nez sound as well. And it did lose a bit of that thud, so I might add that high pass trick again. And really, this is a lot of just experimenting. Cool, so I'm quite happy with that. Cool, so we've done a bit of work on the drums and that. What I might do is just mute them and focus on the bass line. And one thing I noticed with the Polyend tracker, if you've highlighted one of the elements that you're wanting to work with and go up to instrument parameters, if you hold down, you'll notice that it will highlight that instrument for you so you can work directly on that sound. I do like that clean sound, but we could take off its like brightness because we only really want it on the low end. This is where I want to sort of talk about some of the other features of the Polyend tracker, because we can edit the sound in a way that we can add some different variants. Like we do have this quite a long sample, and if we're being more conservative, we can cut that down. But yeah, we will cut that down. So there's a few different ways we can work with the sound. In the sample editor, this is a destructive workflow. So every time we make a change in here, we can't really go back on our change. Like once it happens, that's it. So what I'm going to do, just to demonstrate, is I'm going to cut our sample short. And if we go to crop, apply, we can undo. Just make sure that you're happy with the sound. I think that's still a bit long, and I'll just crop it a bit more. And if we go back to what we were doing, that just saved. If I go back in here, I can't undo. So just be careful in this menu. And if I play, I did make it a bit too short, but that was sort of on purpose, because in the sample playback, what I want to do is actually create a nice little looping section. We can go forward loop, which if we hold the note, it will just keep repeating. And then we create the loop start, we start bringing it down. So we can do like a single cycle, or we can add a bit more to it. So if we play that, so we can sort of hear that loop. Now, if we start zooming in on the sample, I don't like getting super close just yet. Going to bring that to about there, because what we're trying to do is trying to create a visual cycle. So I can see this loop pattern twice, and we can hear it looping. So I like to try and get it on the line. We can zoom in as well and get a little bit more accurate with that sample. So I like to try and draw it straight on the line. Zoom in again. And then I'm going to start editing the loop start and not visually check it. I sort of like to check it by ear, because you can hear when it's out. And then if we zoom in, so we've got a little bit more finer control. Takes a bit of play to find a nice spot that sounds good. So if I zoom out, see where it's picked. So if we listen to it now, we've got a shortened waveform. We've opened up a bit more memory for ourselves, but this is one thing I do like to add to my sound. That sort of frazzled, like you can tell that it's a looped sample. Like this is more from the older style music where they were trying to make it very finite. But I really enjoy adding those like little tiny glitch sections into my instruments, because when you start layering elements on top, just adds that little bit of flavor on top. All right, I've got the melody loaded up and I really do enjoy what we had. Like we've got those elements jumping around, we have some funness to it. But there's one element that I would like to add, is adding a delay to it. Now, what I was thinking is if we stick the delay on that sound there, so we have that lead tone. And if we go back to the instrument parameters and we start adding some delay. Now this comes to a bit of a question with the Polyend tracker, like we could use the delay. We can edit this delay. We can have it sync up with, or we can have some ping pong to add some stereo fill. We can sync it up, say with 4. So every 4 beats it will repeat. So it adds a bit more to it. But what happens if I want a different delay? Because what's happening is these samples are being sent to a delay effect. And we can fill it up and it'll have all these different elements in there delaying with each other. But what happens if I want to make a track with 2 different delays? And this is one thing I really enjoy doing. If you notice in some of my tracks, I'll do it quite a lot, is creating a tracker-based echo, which is actually plotting it in the actual tracker lines. So if I go back to our second melody and unmute that, I haven't really got much information in there. And really I want to add the delay to 13 here. So one thing I can do is I'm just going to go back and remove that delay effect. And usually if I didn't have a couple of elements in there, I'll just copy the track and delay it down. Actually, I'll make it easier. If I just go select all this, we're going to copy it all. I'm just going to pick a new effect or new working file. I'm just going to paste that there. Now, what's really happening is we are creating a delay by actually delaying the amount. So I've got that copy data from this melody line and I'm just going to paste it here. So every second, like activating that second delay. So if we listen to this now, so it's playing at full volume, which would be like a slapback, which has a really nice effect. But what I'm going to do is shift up. I'm going to fill, make sure it's each note. And I'm just going to put in volume, consistent, and we'll make that about there. And because I have that selected, I can actually control the delay itself. So if I play this, still a bit much. If I start about there. So we're delaying that entire column. Now, if I start removing elements that I don't want. Now, if we listen to the second melody. Cool, so I've added an effect for number 13. And if we listen to it, we definitely have that delay, but it's not been sent to that delay effect, which causes us to have multiple different delay types. So we can have that slapback, as I was talking about before. We could have a different delay type that was going on alongside with the delay effect. So really powerful. I really enjoy putting this into my tracks. But if we were to have a look at how this overlays on our other sound, so we'll go back to our pattern 1. Notice how these elements overlay on top of each other. So we're going to have to pick some priorities, but there is a tricky little effect which I'll just play. And it gives us a really unique way of adding a tracker delay inside the same channel that we're working on. And I usually call this a mono-track delay, and it works especially well with arpeggiators. And if I just quickly plot in a arpeggiator. So I've got an arpeggiator going. And when we create these mono-track delays, what we're really doing is creating an offset of the previous one. So we could have the delay sitting like that, but it doesn't sound as organic. So what we can do is we'll go by the third one. So what we're doing is we're referencing this point above, so 3 spaces up. So I'm just going to quickly plot it in. So we've got a C, and then we got an E, and then we got a G, and then we got a C, an E, a G, and we'll carry that D across. So if we listen to that, it's a bit of a garble, but what we can do is we'll go to this one, select everything. I'm just going to fill it with volume commands. So we just go like that. And we'll give it something to work with. So I'm going to go with filled with volume commands, but because I've got that 2-step on, I'm just going to delete every even one. So 0, well, the first one and then everyone after. So all I have to do is hold down delete. Cool, and that gives me control of every second or the echo effect. So I'm just going to go shift up, select all of that. So if I play, I can use the dial to change how much that echo is happening. And really, this is one thing I really enjoy putting into my tracks, and it's something that you should really experiment with, because I really see trackers do a lot, or a lot of tracks, I'll hear this happening, I'll be like, yes. So definitely give it a shot. And then we can apply that sort of same idea to melody line. So we can start copying over those delay effects. So we got to think about our priority, like what sound we want to come through. But if I start going through like this one, we can copy, bring that one across. We'll just sample what's there. I'm just going to mute this one. Yeah. I think that's an important part. It sort of gets cut out because it's a little quick command. So what I might do, because we're wanting a nice little second melody or the delay happening, we'll paste that one in, and I think these are important. So we've had our melody line and we've imported across the important elements that we want to add that delay to. So if I just mute the second melody line, and then if we go back to our first melody, we haven't really lost that much, but we do have that delay element happening, and it's in a single column. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy that from my working file. So we'll copy that, and then we'll bring it back into our little master file that we're working in. So I'm just going to go shift paste, and if we bring in our, if we bring in our drums and our bass, and we take everything out, we do have that delay. It's very subtle and it's sitting in the background, but it just adds that little bit more flavor. Now we're coming up to adding our pad sound. So if we play that, I do like adding a bit of reverb. So because we left our reverb and delay effects quite open, just making sure I've got the right chord. And we add some delay. Cool. And because I'm trying to extend that sound, we'll just have a look at the C major sound file. If we play that, it's quite short. This is something that we can use the Granular synth for. Now the Granular synth, what it'll do is it takes like a very short section of the sound and creates like a little sound inside of it. Now I'm going to add different shape to it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that to the center position, which seems a bit weird. But there's a cool little trick that was on the Polyend side. I'm going to give them full credit for this one because when they showed me, I was pretty ecstatic about it. But if we go up into our instrument parameters and we go back to that granular position and turn on the LFO, we're going to set it to a saw, and we're going to set it to how long we have it. Now we have it for 16 steps, but I want to extend that out to 32 steps. Now if I did this right, and if we go back in here, it's created an effect that extended out our sound to a 32 step, but if we play it in any octave, it's still in that same rate. So we can actually, I'm just going to start fiddling with the sound. Harsh. Cool. So if we mute everything else and we play them by themselves. So if we play this now, we've extended that sound, but if we play this version, it repeats itself about here just because of how we set up that granular sound. So what I'm going to do is probably put an off. We'll just delete that. I'm just going to put an off command here. If we listen to that. has a little bit of carryover, but we'll see how that little artifact enhances our sound. So we'll bring every element back in. Nice, so it sits in the background. It sounds completely different to the sound that we had at the start, and we did extend it out. So that's a nice little technique to make something interesting with a granular synth. Cool, and now we're at the texture sound, which in the previous video to this one, I sort of quickly made the texture granular randomizer, which is a nice little effect to take a sample of any sort and just create random intervals together. So I just wanted to reiterate, I will put a link there to the previous video. Really what's happening is we're using an LFO with that random function that we were talking about to jump between the sounds. So if we go into the sample playback and play that one, it just creates this really nice effect where we have this one sample that if we play it through, it would sound like it's looping, but we have this sample jumping around inside of it as well. So it makes these really nice, hard to distinguish element that we can pick out. But you probably notice that I've started in the center. Now with the LFOs, what it really does is we have the point. So we've picked a point here, which is position here. So 600.675 seconds. Now if we go into that LFO, what this is doing is it's adding 25% to either side. So when we create a massive jump like this, and if we play the sample, we'll see it like hard line between the edges of the sound. So really, just remember when you're using the LFO, it's not adding it on the top, it will actually add it to either side, and that's really for any of these as well. And yeah, if we bring all those elements together, we've added effects through our entire sound. So now we have and I really enjoy that. That sounds quite cool. All right, so we're in a really nice position, and those effects like being able to layer samples to create new samples, the mono track delay, I really enjoy adding mono track delays, and the ability to manipulate our samples to be shorter and longer and more efficient on the device, create these unique flavors that I feel the tracker does really well. So if you think this video is going to help someone else out, definitely give it a thumbs up, because it points the algorithm to tell other people, hey, watch this. And this was going to be a much longer video, but when I finish editing the whole of it, it was just going to be way too long to digest in one sitting. So in the next video, we're going to explore the synth engine and the sample editor on really mangling up sounds and how we can mimic some synthesizers of the past to create some new sounds that we can play with. So I hope you stick around for that one. And if you like what I'm doing here, I thank you so much for sticking around, and I look forward to seeing you next time.